from George Ivanovich Gurdjieff's All and Everything. Chapter 42, Beelzebub in America. 2 Diagnostics later, when the intersystem ship Karnak had resumed its falling, and the confirmed followers of our respected Mullah Nasser ad-Din had again sat down in their usual seats, Hassan once more turned to Beelzebub with the following words. My dear grandfather, may I remind you, as you bade me, about the 3-brained beings of the planet Earth, about those, how are they called? About the beings who breed and exist just on the diametrically opposite side of the place where contemporary terrestrial civilization is flourishing, about those 3-brained beings there who, as you were saying, are very great devotees of the foxtrot. Ah, about those Americans. Yes, that's it, about those Americans, joyously exclaimed Hassan. Of course I remember. I did, indeed, promise to tell you a little also about those contemporary queer ducks there. And Beelzebub began thus. I happened to visit that part of the surface of your planet now called North America, just before my final departure from that solar system. I went there from my last place of existence on that planet, namely from the city Paris of the continent of Europe. From the continent of Europe, I sailed there on a steamship according to the custom of all contemporary what are called dollar holders, and arrived in the capital of North America in the city of New York, or, as it is sometimes called there, the city of the melting pot of the races of the earth. From the pier, I went straight to a hotel called the Majestic, which had been recommended to me by one of my Paris acquaintances, and which for some reason or other was additionally, though not officially, called Jewish. Having settled in this Majestic hotel, I went the same day to look up a certain Mr. there, who also had been recommended to me by still another of my Paris acquaintances. By this word Mr., every being of the male sex is called on that continent who does not wear what is called a skirt. When I found this Mr., to whom I had a letter of introduction, he, as is proper to every genuine American businessman, was up to his eyes in innumerable, as is said there, dollar businesses. I think I might as well remark now, at the very beginning of my elucidations about these Americans, that those 3-brained beings there, especially the contemporary ones, who constitute the root population on this part of the surface of your planet, are in general almost all occupied only with these dollar businesses. On the other hand, with the trades and professions indispensable in the process of being existence, exclusively only those beings are occupied among them who have gone there from other continents temporarily, and for the purpose, as is said, of earning money. Even in this respect, the surrounding conditions of ordinary being existence among your contemporary favorites, chiefly among those breeding on this continent, have been transformed, so to say, into tra-la-la, ooh-a-la-la-la-la, or, as our respected teacher, Mullah Nasser ad-Din, would define it, a soap bubble that lasts a long time only in a quiet medium. Among them there at the present time, these surrounding conditions of ordinary collective existence have already become such that if, for some reason or other, the specialist professionals of all the kinds necessary for their ordinary collective existence should cease to come to them from the other continents to earn money, then it is safe to say that within a month the whole established order of their ordinary existence will completely break down, since there would be none among them who could even so much as bake bread. The chief cause of the gradual resulting of such an abnormality there among them is, on the one side, the law established by them themselves in respect of the rights of parents over their children, and on the other hand, the institution in schools for children of what is called a dollar savings bank, together with the principle of implanting in children a love of such dollars. Thanks to this, and to still various other peculiar external conditions of ordinary existence, also established by them themselves, just this love of dollar business and of dollars themselves has become, in the common presence of each of the native inhabitants of this continent, who reaches responsible age, the predominant urge during his responsible, what is called, feverish existence. That is why each of them is always doing dollar business, and moreover, always several of them at once. Although the aforesaid Mr., to whom I had a letter of introduction, was also very busy with these dollar businesses, he nevertheless received me very cordially. When he read the letter of introduction I presented to him, a strange process immediately began in him, which has already been noticed even by certain of your favorites, it having also become inherent in your contemporary favorites in general, and which they call unconscious preening. And this same process proceeded in him because in the letter I presented, the name of a certain other acquaintance of mine, also a Mr., was mentioned, who in the opinion of many, and of this Mr. also, was considered, as they call him behind his back, a damn clever fellow, that is to say, a dollar expert. In spite of his having been entirely seized with this inherency, proper to your contemporary favorites, he nevertheless, as he talked with me, gradually calmed down, and eventually he informed me that he was ready to place himself entirely at my disposal. Suddenly, however, he remembered something, whereupon he added that, to his profound regret, owing to circumstances over which he had absolutely no control, he could not possibly oblige me that day, but not until the following day, because he was extremely busy with important affairs. And indeed, with the best will in the world, he could not have done so, for these unfortunate Americans, who are always governed by these dollar businesses of theirs, can do what they please only on Sundays, whereas it just happened that the day I went to see him was not a Sunday. There, on that continent, all dollar and other businesses depend never upon the beings themselves. On the contrary, your favorites there always themselves depend entirely on these businesses of theirs. In short, the day not being a Sunday, this genuine American mister was unable to do as he pleased, namely, go along with me and introduce me to the people necessary to me. And we had therefore to agree to meet the following morning at a defined place on the famous street there called Broadway. This street, Broadway, is the foremost and principal street not only in this New York, but, as is said there, is the longest street in any of the large contemporary cities of your planet. So I set off there on the next day. As the automobile taxi in which I drove to this place happened not to come from one of Mr. Ford's factories, I arrived too soon, and consequently this Mr. was not yet there. While awaiting him, I began strolling about, but as all the New York, what are called brokers, take their constitutional, before their famous quick lunch, just in this part of the street Broadway, the jostling in this crowded place became so great that, in order to escape it, I decided to go and sit down somewhere in some spot from where I could see the Mr. I was awaiting arrive. A suitable spot seemed to be a neighboring, typical restaurant there, from the windows of which all the passers-by could be seen. I must say, by the way, that there, on all that planet of yours, there are not so many restaurants in the places of existence of any other group of your favorites as there are in that New York. They particularly abound in the main section, and moreover, the proprietors of these restaurants there are chiefly Armenians, Greeks, and Russian Jews. Now, my boy, in order that you may rest a little from active mentation, I wish for a while to confine myself entirely to the form of mentation of our dear teacher, Mullah Nasser ad-Din, and to talk about a certain, in the highest degree, original custom which has prevailed during the last few years in these contemporary New York restaurants. Inasmuch as the production, importation, and consumption of what are called alcoholic liquids have recently been strictly prohibited to the ordinary beings by the power-possessing beings of this group, and corresponding injunctions have also been given to those beings there, upon whom the power-possessing beings rest their hope for their own welfare, it is now supposed to be almost impossible for the ordinary beings there to obtain such liquids. At the same time, in these New York restaurants, various alcoholic liquids called Arak, Dusico, Scotch whiskey, Benedictine, vodka, Grand Marnier, and many other different liquids, under every possible kind of label, and made exclusively only on what are called old barges, lying at sea off the shores of that continent, are to be had in any quantity you please. The very simus of the said practice lies in this, that if you point your fourth finger, and covering half of your mouth with your right palm, utter the name of any liquid you fancy, then immediately, without more words, that liquid is served at table, only in a bottle purporting to be lemonade, or the famous French Vichy. Now, try with all your might to exert your will and to actualize in your presence a general mobilization of your perceptive organs, so that without missing anything at all, you may absorb and transubstantiate in yourself everything relating to just how these alcoholic liquids I have enumerated are prepared at sea on old barges off the shores of that continent. I regret very much that I missed making myself thoroughly familiar with all the details of this contemporary terrestrial science. All I managed to learn was that into all the recipes for these preparations the following acids enter: sulfuric, nitric, and muriatic acids, and, most important of all, the incantation of the famous contemporary German professor Kishmanoff. This last ingredient, namely Professor Kishmanoff's incantation for alcoholic liquids, is delightfully intriguing, and it is concocted, so it is said, as follows. First of all, there must be prepared, according to any old recipe, already familiar to specialists in the business, 1,000 bottles of liquid. Precisely 1,000 bottles must be prepared, because if there should be merely 1 bottle more or 1 bottle less, the incantation will not work. These 1,000 bottles must be placed on the floor, and then quietly beside them a single bottle of any genuine alcoholic liquid existing anywhere there must be placed and kept there for a period of 10 minutes, at the end of which time, very slowly and quite indispensably, while scratching the right ear with the left hand, one must utter with certain pauses this said alcoholic incantation. Upon this, not only are the contents of all the 1,000 bottles instantly transformed into precisely that alcoholic liquid contained in the said single bottle, but every bottle of the 1,000 even acquires the same label borne by that 1 bottle of genuine alcoholic liquid. Among the conjuries of this unprecedented German professor Kishmanoff, there are, as I learned, several indeed most amazing ones. This famous German professor, a specialist in this branch, started, as is said, inventing these remarkable conjuries of his quite recently, that is to say, in the early years of the last great general European process of reciprocal destruction there. When a food crisis supervened in his fatherland, Germany, he, sympathizing with the plight of his compatriots, invented his first conjury, which consisted in the preparation of a very cheap and economical chicken soup. This first conjury of his is called German chicken soup, and its execution is likewise extremely interesting, namely as follows. Into a very commodious pot, set on the hearth, common water is poured, and then a few very finely chopped leaves of parsley are strewn into it. Then both doors of the kitchen must be opened wide, or, if there's only one door, a window must be opened wide. And while the incantation is very loudly pronounced, a chicken must be chased through the kitchen at full speed. Upon this, a most delicious chicken soup is ready hot in the pot. I heard further that during the years of that great process of reciprocal destruction, the beings of Germany made use of this conjury on a colossal scale. This method of preparing chicken soup having proved in practice to be, as it were, good, or at least extremely economical. The reason is that a single chicken could do duty for quite a long time, because it could be chased and chased and chased until for some reason or other the chicken all by itself, as is said there, went on strike and declined to breathe the air any longer. And in the event that the chicken resisted the infection of hypocrisy, in spite of its having existed among your favorites, and indeed did cease to wish to breathe the air any longer, then for this eventuality, as I afterwards learned, a common custom was established there among the beings of that group called Germany. Namely, when the chicken went on strike, its owners would very solemnly roast it in the oven, and for this solemn occasion would unfailingly invite all their relatives to dinner. It is interesting to notice also that another professor of theirs, also famous, named Steiner, in the course of his what are called scientific investigations of supernatural phenomena, mathematically established that on the occasions when these chickens were served at these invitation dinners, always their owners would recite the same thing. Namely, every hostess, rolling her eyes to heaven and pointing to the chicken, would say with great feeling that it was the famous Pamir pheasant, and that it had been specially sent to them from Pamir by their dear nephew, who resided there as consul for their great fatherland. On that planet, there exist in general conjuries for every possible kind of purpose. These conjuries began multiplying particularly after many of the beings of this peculiar planet had become specialists in supernatural phenomena, and came to be called occultists, spiritualists, theosophists, violet magicians, chiromants, and so forth. Besides being able to create supernatural phenomena, these specialists also knew very well how to make the opaque look transparent. This same American prohibition of the consumption of alcohol can serve us yet again as an excellently illuminating example for understanding to what degree the possibilities for the crystallization of data for being reflection are atrophied in these contemporary responsible power-possessing beings, in respect of the fact that such an absurdity is being actually repeated there. There, on that continent, everybody, without exception, thanks to this prohibition, now consumes the same alcohol, even those who in other circumstances would probably never have consumed it. There, on the continent America, the very same is occurring with the consumption of alcohol as occurred with the chewing of the seeds of the poppy by the beings of the country Maroplasi. The difference is that in the country of Maroplasi, the beings were then addicted to the use of at least genuine poppy seeds, whereas in America, the beings now consume any liquid that comes their way, provided only that it bears the name of some alcoholic liquid existing somewhere on their planet. And another difference is that in respect of concealing their consumption of the prohibited product from government eyes, the contemporary beings now breeding on the continent America are not by any means so naive as were the beings of the Maroplasi epoch. To what lengths your contemporary favorites have gone in this respect you can understand very well from the following examples. At the present time, there in that place, every young man with his mother's milk scarcely dry on his lips infallibly carries with him what seems to be a perfectly ordinary, harmless cigarette case or cigar case, and, sitting in a restaurant, or in one of their famous dance halls, he casually produces the cigarette case or cigar case from his pocket, and everybody around imagines, of course, that he is about to smoke. But not a bit of it. He just gives a peculiar little twist to this cigarette case or cigar case of his, when presto, a diminutive tumbler appears in his left hand, whereupon with his right hand he slowly and quietly pours out for himself from this cigarette case or cigar case into this diminutive tumbler of his some kind of liquid, probably Scotch whiskey, but concocted, as I have already told you, on some barge off the American coast. During my observations there at that time, I once witnessed still another picture. In one of the said restaurants sat 2 young American women not far from my table. An attendant of this restaurant, or as they say, a waiter, served them with a bottle of some mineral water and a couple of glasses. One of the women gave a certain little twist to the handle of her fashionable umbrella, whereupon a liquid, obviously also Scotch whisky or something of the kind, began likewise to flow very quietly and very slowly from the handle into their glasses. In short, my boy, the same is being repeated on this continent America, as also took place quite recently in the large community called Russia. There, the power-possessing responsible beings also prohibited the consumption of the famous Russian vodka, with the consequence that these beings very soon adapted themselves to consume, instead of this vodka, the no less famous hanja, from the effects of which thousands of these unfortunate beings are still dying there daily. But in the present case, we must certainly give the contemporary American beings their due. In their skill at concealing their consumption of this famous alcohol from the authorities, they are infinitely more civilized than the beings of the community Russia. Well then, my boy, to avoid the bustle of the street, I entered a typical New York restaurant, and having taken a seat at one of the tables there, began gazing out of the window at the crowd. As it is the common custom there on your planet, when people sit in a restaurant or any other such public place, always and without fail, to pay what they call money for something for the profit of the proprietor of the establishment, I did the same and also ordered for myself a glass of their famous what is called orange-ade. This famous American drink consists of the juice squeezed from oranges, or from the famous what is called there grapefruit, and the beings of that continent drink it always and everywhere in incredible quantities. It must be admitted that this famous orange-ade of theirs does occasionally refresh them in hot weather. But, on the other hand, in its action upon what are called the mucous membranes of the stomach and intestines, this drink of theirs is still another of the many factors there, which taken together are gradually bringing about, although slowly yet inexorably certainly, the destruction of that unnecessary and negligible function called the digestive function of the stomach. Well then, sitting in the said restaurant with this famous orange-ade and watching the passers-by in the hope of seeing among them the mister I awaited, I began casually looking around at the objects in the restaurant also. On the table at which I was sitting, I saw among other things also what is called the menu of the restaurant. Menu, there on your planet, is the name given to a sheet of paper on which are written the names of all the varieties of food and drink available in the said restaurant. Reading the contents of this paper, I found among other things that no fewer than 78 different dishes could be ordered there that day. This staggered me, and I wondered what on earth kind of a stove these Americans must have in their kitchens to be able to prepare 78 dishes on it for just one day. I ought to add that I had been on every of the continents there, and had been the guest of a great many beings of different castes. And I had seen food prepared innumerable times, and also in my own house. So I already more or less knew that to prepare a single dish, at least 2 or 3 saucepans were required. And I reckoned that as these Americans prepared 78 dishes in one kitchen, they would certainly need about 300 pots and pans. I had the fancy to see for myself how it was possible to accommodate on one stove 300 saucepans. So I decided to offer what is called there a good tip to the waiter who served me with the orangeade, to let me see the kitchen of the restaurant with my own eyes. The waiter somehow arranged it, and I went into the kitchen. When I got there, what do you think? What kind of picture did I see? A stove with 100 pots and pans? Not on your life. I saw there only a small, what is called there, midget gas stove, such as what are called old bachelors and man-haters, that is to say, worthless spinsters, usually have in their rooms. By the side of this pimple of a stove sat an extremely fat-necked cook of Scotch origin, reading the newspaper inseparable from every American. He was reading, it seems, the newspaper The Times. I looked around in amazement, and also at the neck of this cook. While I was thus looking round in astonishment, a waiter came into the kitchen from the restaurant, and in peculiar English ordered a certain very elaborate dish from this fat-necked cook. I think I may as well tell you that I then also noticed from his accent that the waiter who ordered this dish with the fancy name had only recently arrived there, from the continent of Europe, obviously with the dream of filling his pockets there with American dollars. With that dream, in fact, about these American dollars, which indeed every European has, who has never been to America, and which now allows no one in Europe to sleep in peace. When this aspirant to an American multimillionairedom had ordered the said fancy dish from the fat-necked cook, the latter got up from his place without haste, and very heavily, and first of all, took down from the wall a small, what is called there, bachelor's frying pan. Then, having lighted his dwarf stove, he put the frying pan on it, and still moving ponderously, he then went over to one of the many cupboards, took from it a tin of some canned food, opened it, and emptied its contents into the said frying pan. Then, in the same way, he went over to another cupboard, and again took out a tin of some canned food. But this time he put only a little of the contents into the frying pan, and having stirred the resulting mixture, he put the whole lot with precision on a plate, which he set on the table, and again sat down in his former place, and resumed the interrupted reading of his newspaper. The waiter who had ordered this fancy dish soon returned to the kitchen, bearing a very large, what is called, copper tray, on which were a vast quantity of hollow metal, what is called fashionable cutlery. And having placed the dish with this strange food on the said tray, he carried the whole into the restaurant. When I returned and resumed my seat at my table, I saw that at another table quite near, a mister was sitting, who was smacking his lips while eating the dish which I had chanced to see prepared in the kitchen. Looking again out of the window into the street, I eventually discerned the mister I expected in the crowd. So, settling my bill, at once I left the restaurant. And now, my boy, maintaining the form of mentation of our dear teacher, I might as well tell you also a little about the speech of these American beings.